Today, all eyes are on King Charles III, but we cannot forget the longest reigning monarch, the spectacular Queen Elizabeth II, whose crowning ceremony was the first televised coronation. Elizabeth's father, King George VI, was crowned in 1937. The event was the first coronation to be broadcast live on the radio, reaching an estimated audience of 20 million listeners worldwide. King George V was crowned in 1911. It is the oldest colorized event we know, even though most of the footage has been lost. King Edward VII's coronation in 1902 was the first time a reigning monarch traveled by automobile to the ceremony, showcasing Britain's embrace of modern technology. Queen Victoria in 1838 was the first royal ever to be photographed. In this picture with her children, the Queen found out she had closed her eyes. In an attempt to remove what she perceived as an unflattering image, she scratched out her face while sparing the children. William IV hated ceremonies and had to be persuaded to have a coronation. He spent so little money on it that it became known as the penny coronation. It did not feature a grand banquet. Instead, the guests were served turtle soup. The coronation of King George IV in 1821 was the most expensive coronation in British history, costing over £21 million. The king was known for his love of luxury and extravagance, and he spared no expense in planning his coronation. In 1761 came the coronation of George III. An interesting fact about George is that he is still the longest reigning king ever at 59 years and 96 days. George II's coronation was the first time Zadok the priest was performed. It has been used ever since and has even been modified for the UEFA Champions League. George I was the first ever German king of England. His coronation is noted for excluding his wife, whom he had imprisoned over a very famous, scandalous affair. The music for Anne's coronation was composed by William Croft, who was a prominent composer of the time. His anthem, God Save the Queen, became the official national anthem of Great Britain. Before Anne came the coronation of William and Mary in 1689, which was the last joint coronation in Britain's history. James II was the last Roman Catholic monarch to be crowned in England. His coronation was held on April 23, 1685. James's brother Charles II was the last monarch to be crowned while wearing a full suit of armor, a tradition dating back to medieval times. His coronation took place on April 23, 1661, and since then the royal family has switched to more comfortable robes. Charles I was crowned in 1626, and his reign was marked by conflicts with the Parliament, which eventually led to his execution. James I was crowned in 1603 and became the first Scottish king to rule the Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth I took place in 1559. Elizabeth was the first monarch to wear a gown made entirely of English silk. Prior to that, monarchs had worn garments made of imported fabrics such as velvet and satin. Mary I was the first ever queen regnant of England. She was crowned queen in 1553 after centuries of men ruling the country. Edward VI was the first Protestant king of England. He was crowned at just 9 years old, making him the second youngest king ever. Henry VIII was the first time the oath of supremacy was introduced, and it required all public officials to swear allegiance to the king as the head of the church and to renounce any allegiance to the Pope. Henry VII was crowned on October 30th, 1485. His coronation was notable for the presence of the first black person to attend a coronation in England. His name was John Blank, and he was a trumpeter in the royal court. Richard III's coronation took place on July 6, 1483. It is the last time a coronation took place in York, and he was also the last king to die in battle. Edward IV in 1461 was the first person to conduct his coronation entirely in English. Henry VI was crowned king in 1429 at the age of just 8 years old, making him the youngest person to ever be crowned King of England. Henry V was crowned on April 9, 1413. The ceremony was marked by a terrible snowstorm, but the common people were undecided as to whether it was a good or bad omen. Henry IV represented the biggest shift in the English language. His coronation was in French, but he was the first monarch to conduct business in English. Before Henry, English was considered a language of the commoners. Richard II was only 10 years old when he became king, and he is often described as being the most beautiful king. Edward III was crowned king on February 1, 1327. A great military general, his coronation was noted for hosting elaborate tournaments such as jousting and sword fighting. Edward II's coronation was the first time a coronation chair was used. It had been made by his father and has been used ever since. Edward I was the first monarch to use the title King of England instead of King of the English, a shift from ruling the people to ruling the land. Henry III was crowned 3 different times. His coronation was held in 1216, 1220, and 1221. During the coronation banquet of John in 1199, several Scottish nobles attempted to seize the Stone of Scone, an ancient symbol of Scottish kingship, which was kept beneath King John's throne. The attempt was unsuccessful, and the stone remained in English hands until 1996. When Richard I was crowned as king in 1189, he refused to take the English oath. He saw them as ancient and famously declared that he would sell London itself if he could find a buyer, showing a disregard for the people and institutions of his kingdom. During the coronation feast of Henry II, a quarrel broke out between Henry's Norman and English followers, leading to violence and chaos. To calm the situation, Henry himself had to intervene and release some English prisoners who had been taken by the Normans. Not much is known about Stephen, but it is known his father had a reputation for being a coward during the First Crusade. Henry was the first Norman king to marry an Englishwoman, Matilda of Scotland, who was crowned alongside him as queen consort. William was often called Rufus, perhaps because of his ruddy appearance or more likely due to having red hair as a child. The first documented coronation ever at Westminster was that of William the Conqueror on the 25th of December, 1066, almost 1,000 years ago.